Good morning, everyone. Um, I would like to welcome you to this year's sixth EPRC webinar, and it's the first for this autumn semester as well. So my name is Liliana Fonseca. I am a research associate at the European Policies Research Centre, and we are delighted to be able to welcome you all from a bit all over the world, I know, or at least all over Europe today, and hopefully for future webinars as well. I would like to present Dr. Christian Calvillo, and who will be presenting us on this topic today of community engagement and low carbon energy projects in Orkney. We also have discussant Helen Heinz, who will be presenting after Christian. The first presentation will last about 15 minutes, and then Helen will have also 15 minutes. And in the remaining time, we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. So if you would like to make an intervention, you can use the Zoom raise a hand function, which is at the bottom of your screen, or you can also feel free to use the chat function. So you can do that during the course of the presentations, and we'll get to it during the Q&A. And then you can unmute if you want to ask your question. So just before introducing our speakers, I would just like to inform you that this meeting is being recorded, which means that you and your colleagues have the opportunity to then come back to it and follow the meeting at a later stage. The recording will then be made available on our YouTube page, which is EPRC Strath. And we will share this with you by email as well, so whenever it is available. We would also like to encourage you to use Twitter if you want to share your thoughts on the webinar. And today, then I will present Christian first. Dr. Christian Calvillo is a research fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy at the University of Strathclyde. He's working on a number of projects in different energy areas, including electrification of transport and heat, energy efficiency, fuel poverty, hydrogen, and industrial decarbonization. He did his PhD studies as part of the Erasmus Mundus joint doctoral program on sustainable energies, technologies, and strategies. His research interests include energy system modeling, decarbonization scenario analysis, industrial decarbonization, renewable energy integration, fuel and transport poverty, and economic policy analysis. So you can see he is quite the expert on these kinds of topics. I had the pleasure to work with him in this project, and I hope now that we can give you a good overview of our findings. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing and I'll give the floor to Christian.
Thank you, Liliana, and a very kind introduction. I'm not an expert. I just happen to do lots of things, which I guess is different. I'm going to share the presentation. Yes. Can everyone see that okay? And hear me okay? Yeah?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll probably start then because I think we have a limited amount of time. As Liliana mentioned, this is a little project we developed together, also in collaboration with our colleague Tanya Mueller also from Strathclyde. And we were looking at Orkney in particular with the idea of these big projects, how they present community benefit. And if they do, how they can help tackle challenges such as fuel and transport poverty in island communities. Just to mention as well, we did this little project thanks to funding from the British Academy, and we did it in collaboration with Thaw Orkney. Lots of support we got from Thaw, the organization of Thaw, and also in collaboration with the Island Centre for Net Zero, which helped us out setting up the workshops and just general discussion on the framing of the workshops. So just to start a little bit about the project itself and a little bit of background, like why we wanted to do this in Orkney. I think people should be familiar that Orkney has been in the forefront of environmental projects and low carbon projects since 1993. There have been this recent Island Growth Deal and also the establishment of this Island Centre for Net Zero, which the aim is to become the lighthouse communities in the energy transition. So it's a big kind of starting point for many of these technologies and for these pilot projects, which are quite exciting. There's lots of things going on. But there are still challenges in Orkney. The level of fuel and transport poverty is relatively high. So the question was like, how are the translatable benefits of this on communities and the cost on the cost of living? Like, we know all that everyone is having a hard time paying for their bills. So we wanted to understand what are the benefits from these projects, and if there are any changes emerging from in the context of the island communities, for example, the energy crisis, Brexit, things like that. That's the general idea. So the aim is to assess the effectiveness of existing low carbon energy projects in enabling a just transition to low carbon heat and mobility in Orkney. Have the communities been involved in the design and implementation of these projects? That's a question. And if so, how? And then what are the benefits, that direct or indirect, that the community feels they have received from these projects? The thing is, depending on who you ask, you might get a different answer, but we wanted really to get the community perspective from this issue. So how we did that, the core activity was citizen engagement. The idea was to focus on vulnerable groups as much as possible. At the end of the day, it was open to everyone, but we want to hear stories about people involved in fuel or transport poverty. So we engaged with the community in 2 workshops using deliberative research. The idea of this is basically we ask people to deliberate on a particular area, on a particular point. And we did these workshops in Kirkwall and Stromness in May this year, as I said, with collaboration with Orkney and the Center for Net Zero. How the workshop looked like, I thought it was just relevant to mention it very briefly, so you kind of understand how we get the outcomes we got. So the objective was, again, to understand the specific issues on the locality from the point of view of the community, and then discuss the low carbon projects existing and how they were developed, how was the community aware of them, and how much they engaged with it, and what are the perceived benefits. And based on all that discussion, we can then find lessons from these projects and potential solutions for some of these community issues. So the expected outcome of the workshop was to get insights, lessons learned, potential good practice for future projects. I think there are lots of good stuff already there. We just kind of wanted to see what we can learn and how can we move it forward. A little bit more on the structure of the workshop. We had a pre-workshop questionnaire to understand the type of people we had in the room. And then the actual questions were basically around 3 things. How familiar are the community on these low carbon projects? To what extent they have been involved in the design and development of the projects? And to what extent have you or your community benefited from these projects? So those are the big 3 questions we asked. And these are the findings. I try to pass the other bits a little bit quicker so we can focus a little bit more on the findings, which I think is the more interesting bit. This is as a starting point. We did some word clouds. This is based on the repetition of words, like which type of topics were mentioned more and more, not necessarily with any kind of feeling attached to it, but it's kind of more on the discussion points. And from the one we had in Stromness, we can see that, of course, there were like low carbon mentioned quite a bit, wind turbines, wind farms, because those are the main projects that we discussed that people were commenting on. But there were other areas being mentioned. For instance, we talk about West Orkney and particular projects were developed over there. We touch on electric cars, fuel poverty. We touched about community benefits and how the community is the benefits perceived. Is it direct? Is it not? And there were many other kind of bits and pieces around that, but those are kind of the key elements. An interesting one, European funding came as well. You see in the bottom of the figure. So you get those little bits of keywords that can give you a flavor of the discussion. For Kirkwall, actually, and that's why this is interesting, I feel, because you get a different workshop asking the same questions, but because the people in the room are different, you get different answers and you get different focus. Not that anyone was contradicting, one workshop was contradicting the other. I don't think it was the case. It was just that the focus was slightly different. And here, fuel poverty was a lot more prevalent in the discussion, and kind of what people get and what people feel about these things. Wind turbines, of course, came back as a topic. Community benefit and the smart heating or smart heating systems were also big on the discussion points. Money kind of came more as a point of discussion here. And yeah, so again, on the what works well, what is the smart systems, how they be implemented and how they work. We're talking about the jobs and skills in this project, this workshop as well, the traders and how they enable systems. So that's kind of, again, just a very high level flavor of the discussion. But what is more interesting when you start analyzing the themes that comes from this, and we kind of got a few over here from the major themes on the discussion. This is not an exhaustive list. This is not like a fully detailed analysis. We're carrying out a more, let's say, more sound analysis of the whole transcript of the workshops. But you get, again, just having a quick look, some interesting points, for instance, about the meaningful engagement. And there was a lot of discussion about that. We got a couple of quotes here to kind of illustrate the point, but it's basically people feel that it's hard to do meaningful engagement. Partly because of the quality of the projects. There are so many going on all the time that it's hard to keep up, and people cannot be involved in everything. Also, it feels, as was mentioned a few times, that the engagement might be a bit kind of towards the end of the project development stages, more on the kind of, do you have an objection type thing, more than it's from the start and kind of as a development exercise. And this is what is mentioned here. Do you do a real consultation? Is actually a development exercise, not a meeting or a focus group. You actually need to build from the start, testing out ideas to people and see what they think. On the direct benefits, it was a bit of a mixed bag, we feel, from the discussion. Like, some people saw some good benefits from it, of course, some examples that give direct benefit to people. For instance, we get a discussion about the E-Day residents, the E-Day Development Trust, that they get income directly from the turbine. They have a wind turbine there operating, and they get money by selling that energy. So it goes directly to the people. But it's not always the case in all projects. Now, that's what we found. Also, there are kind of other benefits that were discussed, but it's a little bit harder for people to necessarily see. For instance, new jobs or existing maintenance jobs. People kind of perceive that, but it's less obvious for many. And another point is that when we got that engagement and the community discussed this, they said that all project developers come with an idea of a community benefit, but it's not always very clear, and it's kind of a bit of abstract. Some of the issues that also were discussed, and this came quite a lot, the feeling is that those that jump into the community energy or the community benefit early on were able to actually grab that benefit because they could develop the projects. But now it's because of constraints on the network. There is a lot less uptake on projects because they're basically not allowed to go online anymore. So there were quite a few discussion around that. Also, a general point that we discussed, that people pay more for their energy there, even though they have all that energy production going on, which is a bit unfair, and it's understandable. So, and also a last good point here, and accessibility and affordability. There were some projects that developed good direct benefits to people. For instance, the access to an electric car, but that was not necessarily available for everyone. You probably need to have a certain amount of income to be able to kind of do the upfront payment of it, and then if you get the means, or you have solar panels, or you have batteries, etc., then you can benefit from these projects. But not everyone will be able to do so. Some other challenges, kind of high level stuff, limited outreach. The same comment came out a few times, that it's always the same people doing these things on the engagement element, not necessarily the whole community is involved. Partly is because they're necessarily not accessible. They're not local to people necessarily. And they say that it's difficult to use to drive in the morning, take a day off work to go complain about a wind turbine, and says that it's kind of, people don't necessarily feel that they should do that. About resourcing, the funding is a big question mark. Like, it feels that it's been drying out a little bit. Also about the availability of jobs and skills and people to do the things. Like, there's a lot of constructors that are not prepared to go and work on the islands, for instance. There was a discussion around that as well. The restriction, as I mentioned, was big. on the agenda of the discussion, but also kind of more on general constrained infrastructure. And here I wanted to highlight a couple of things. The transport, getting to Orkney can be challenging. We just heard from one of our participants that the ferries weren't going today because of the stormy weather. So you have those type of challenges. Properties, we heard that a lot as well. There are not enough properties in the islands, not enough to host new people coming to work, for instance, which is a challenge. General provision of transport and cycling infrastructure was a challenge as well. And services more generally, we had that discussion not only in Orkney, but also in other areas of the North Highlands. The local NHS services is not as good as it was. And there's kind of this expectation that people need to go to Inverness, which is very far for many, and it's not kind of something you should do or be doing, really. I'm just trying to finish up with a couple of good practice and potential solutions to this. So we saw good practice from some of these projects. Again, the example of EDA Development Trust, the Reflex for decarbonization and smart energy systems. You have good engagement and direct benefits coming from these projects, but again, not necessarily accessible for everyone. That's something we need to highlight. The third sector organization, we saw in the case of working with Thor, there is very engaged communities with this organization, and that's we think a strong element to learn from. But of course, there is engagement that could be developed in a better way, more developmental, instead of one-off at the end. So start from the start, taking people along the whole journey and being more inclusive, focus on generating the benefits instead of just objections. Yes, decide community benefits with no cash was kind of a big point as well made by the participants. So, or just general conclusions. Some of these things I already mentioned, so I'm going to go through them quickly. There's a lot of things going on in Orkney, which is great. I think this it's a fortune to have this type of things going on in your island, but at the same time, I feel people might feel a bit of guinea pigs, which is not great. So the part of the engagement is key to that. You engage the people that feel less a guinea pig, but more as a lucky few that get that nice project going on. The tiny Orkney Island community has led to high levels of awareness and interest, which is great as well. But it does not always lead to engagement with projects. There is the issue of accessibility that we mentioned, relevance of projects for the community, lack of direct benefits, limited meaningful engagement can hinder participation. Again, people get workshop tired. We felt that as well in our engagement, which is a shame, but we can absolutely understand it. Like when you get invited to all these things, at some point you kind of lose interest. So it's hard. The only way of overcoming that is by making sure that the benefit is clear upfront. And yes, the energy grid restriction and constraint infrastructure a major challenge for the islands and kind of hinder all these projects as well. Just to end with next steps, we have produced a couple of outputs already. We're finalizing and publishing them in the coming weeks. But also to highlight, this was just very much an initial exploratory study. We want to develop it further, gaining better understanding of the root causes, the potential to explore more locations. We think this type of challenges can be replicable in many other areas, so we'll be interested to analyze that. Also focusing on the solutions, the bottom-up community initiatives, local energy system type elements. Also the idea of the energy markets and energy tariffs that were a common factor here, challenging for fuel and transport poverty. Also, there are less obvious links or impacts of fuel and transport poverty that would be interesting to explore, like the link with health. I think it's not unknown that bad insulation, poor heating could directly affect your health, but also work and education, the ability to work or learn. The point of local identity, we found that as a very interesting point, and the idea that these close communities, very strong identity, could be an asset in developing this type of projects, because there is more kind of that community cohesiveness that could help. Tourism is something that came up as well, and it's a challenge in itself, but also could be beneficial for the community. So it's something that we want to explore more, how that relates to the whole low carbon journey. Again, the jobs of skills challenge and local labor market constraints. So also open for any suggestions that people may have. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you again very much for your attention. I'm sorry if I took too long, hopefully not too long. And yes, I'll leave it there, and thank you. I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. No, you're not over the time, so don't worry, you're good. That was a very interesting discussion, but I'm a bit biased, of course, because I was a part of this project. I will now introduce our discussant, who has researched similar topics in both Orkney and the Canary Islands for her PhD, Helen Heinz. She's doing her PhD at Nottingham Business School on the attractiveness of community microgrids for future energy communities and investors in the context of geographical islands. She is convinced that the energy sector needs diversity of thinking to create technology and business solutions based on local needs and perceptions. And so she is addressing the complexity of local energy transitions. She has worked for research institutes like the Fraunhofer ISE and IWES for the Institute of Technology in the Canary Islands, but also, of course, in industry. And throughout her career, she focused on learning from different sectors and countries. So now she's combining her interdisciplinary knowledge and experiences and finishing her PhD, which is part of Marie Curie Innovative Training Network in business to accelerate business innovation and aligned with community engagement and to provide policy recommendations to accelerate the just energy transition. So I am very pleased to introduce Helen, so I'll give the floor to you now.
Thank you very much, Liliana, for the nice, kind introduction. I immediately start with sharing my screen. And there we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you very much, Christian, Liliana, and Tanya, for the opportunity to share my research results of my PhD research with you in this webinar. Today, as you said, I researched the Orkney Islands and the Canary Islands. Today, I'd like to present you my findings regarding the Orkney Islands, an attractive community microgrid solution in the Orkney Islands. How could that look like? Oops. I need to, oh, there we go. So before I start with the finding of my case study, what do I mean with a community microgrid? So a community microgrid is something that is actually more like a concept. It's not something that is standardized or the one-size-fits-all thing, but it has some kind of definition. So for example, there's a kind of a integration platform of different technologies that helps to go towards 100% renewable. It includes local energy production, consumption, storage, and local control. It has inside, we have the energy community, those the people that live inside, active users or local prosumers, people that actively need to engage with the way they use energy and make the world system work and efficient. And at the same time, there are investors that I focus on, because that a microgrid includes like lots of infrastructure, lots of technology that costs a lot, and considering an energy just transition, we need investors to support the community with the financial bit. And a microgrid has a single connection to the main grid, which allows to sell, share, or trade energy, and which then gives money and benefits back. So community microgrid, if you think about it, as makes kind of Orkney in some kind of sense, because Orkney has different technologies included, different participants at different levels, different energy projects. So in the end, a microgrid is not, the definition is not so extensive that it gives some kind of scale. So, but Orkney Islands are a nice case study because they provide those island boundness to investigate how this concept per se would be attractive for the local community. And yeah, what is however important is the local control at kind of the center of the microgrid definition, which allows the synergy between the technologies and potential business models that then provide the benefits. And overall, I think the perspective on community microgrid makes lots of sense because it would help to tackle island challenges and provide holistic benefits to both community and investors. Still, community microgrid development is, or local energy system development is not really something that is already in process. It's rather small, little projects. So that really is also because of lack of engagement. And so I wondered in my research, how can actually the community and investors simultaneously be engaged to participate and invest in community microgrids? I did that through first literature review and development of a conceptual framework that guided my research, then a qualitative case study approach. Here I present you my case study of the Orkney Islands. I did surveys and semi-structured interviews with the local community and investors. Always I try to capture different kind of perspectives through getting kind of a diversity in my participants. And then I triangulated my findings also with secondary data that I found online. So yeah, like I already kind of pointed out with my research, I wanted to find out what makes engagement attractive and what would drive engagement rather than what hinders engagement. So to look for how to move forward, basically. And first of all, my findings showed that it is important that it needs to be attractive for community and investors at the same time, because they both kind of are entangled and need each other for it to be attractive overall. But for the individuals, for the community, what would it mean? It would mean, for example, addressing local challenges. If they see that their local challenges are addressed, if their benefits are increased, whether those are technological, economic, environmental, or social benefits, or like Christian said, tackling full poverty, something like this, then that would certainly be attractive. They would be interested to get engaged. But it still, even though I don't want to look too much at what hinders, risks need to be increased because participants, they don't want to have risk, and that's just natural. It needs barriers for participation need to be decreased, and trust and transparency needs to be increased. And also what is attractive for the community is a fair solution, which means kind of sharing risks and benefits. And in the context of the just energy transition, it would mean decreasing energy vulnerability, increasing energy democracy, and that overall helps to encourage active participation and engagement. And for the investors, yes, certainly attractiveness means that it ensures profitability, economic benefits, stable returns over the lifetime of the project and beyond. But for community microgrid, as we imagine it in the Orkney Islands, for example, it would also, it's necessary basically that the investors would to some extent be interested in sustainable investments and innovation to provide and benefit from the community microgrids. Potential benefits to provide environmental and social value to the community or the overall society in the long term, and also benefit from the technological aspects of innovation. Still, investors are, depending on their risk appetite, they want to have decreased risks and uncertainties, which need some sort of set boundaries and clear regulatory frameworks. Overall, for investors, it's attractive to have a sustainable solution. That means economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable, balancing risks and benefits. And they definitely need to adopt a forward-thinking, active role, and that would then get them engaged in long-term investments. So, giving this background, I investigated the Orkney Islands. And from my interviews, I found that the Orkney Islands are, well, a small site, sparsely inhabited and isolated energy system, but grid connected to the UK energy grid. They face lots of challenges, where some challenges are certainly risks for the development of a huge community microgrid, like the balancing issues in combination with the lack of digital connectivity. At the same time, lots of regulatory uncertainty and the current energy system structure that doesn't allow the local energy consumption. And at the same time, there are some local challenges that actually create opportunities, that is, drivers for community microgrids, like, in fact, the high level of full poverty or curtailment of community microgrids, perceived unjust energy transition, and like Christian already said, the amount of already existing projects that all highlighted as well the local sense of community and for the environment, engagement, and the local history of innovation. So, then from the perspectives I analyzed from my interviewees, I put together kind of an aligned attractiveness solution. So what is an attractive Orkney Island microgrid proposition? That is, in the end, it turned out it is something that is focused on socioeconomic benefits, that demonstrates sense of collectiveness, innovation, and also equal participation. So where the community become partners from the beginning and highlight the shared returns and emphasize benefits to the community. That is, like, now zooming in on the energy community. What does that mean? It means the community wants economic benefits, but it's interesting, they don't want economic benefits for themselves really, but they always highlight the whole island perspective for the whole community. They want that the whole community benefits similarly, which really emphasizes the social notion on the islands. And as one participant said, a community is a verb and not a noun. So people want to engage and want to help each other. They want cheaper energy bills for each other, jobs, local jobs that help tackle full poverty in the long term. And yeah, then at the same time, they're very eager. Like Christian said, they are familiar with the project. They are engaged, but it's difficult. So what they want really is that they engage and that they are really listened to. So they want to be engaged from the beginning. They want change. They want, if something that will really be attractive for them, it would be something that is transparent and that allows them to participate in shared dialogue and decision making from the beginning. And even if they would even be happy to initiate and manage to some extent themselves, if that would actually unfold the community benefit that they haven't seen in all the other projects in the past. For investors, it is similar, that they also want economic benefit. Without economic benefits, they say there is no investment. There has to be some kind of return, but they are aware that some return also needs to be for the community, as community benefit is important on the island to ensure acceptance and also tackle regional inequalities, although they are would be happy with future economic benefits for themselves. And at the same time, the investor participants, they highlighted that for them, a community-led project would be very much attractive because it actually decreases their risks of people dropping out or not participating, because community-led projects support kind of a relationship with the technology and acceptance. But at the same time, they know that they would need to support the community and help them with their experience and tackle any kind of barriers, like even especially the financial barrier, but it would be, so coming back to the header, it's kind of where community and investors would become partners, and not, as Christian said, community is only consulted at the very end. In the center, in the green boxes, you see how the microgrid elements come together. So for community and investors, it's attractive if the technology solution is simple and transparent and not complex. At the same time, obviously, kind of putting everything then on the larger island scale, that kind of gets complex, but in an increasing way. So people imagine that the islands would develop towards a smart local energy system and increasingly implement technologies, and especially emphasizing technology for heating and small-scale, simple solutions for the household. What is an issue on the islands is also the internet connection, which is for digitalization needed for smart energy systems, and also lots of regulations are unfit for the local context and for them to actually locally control and benefit from the locally produced energy. So those need to be changed. Otherwise, this kind of synergy between technology and business model is not yet possible. So it again highlights the process, the need for change that has to come before engagement can actually start. And so the business model focus on the energy part is really fair business models, and looking at community and investors, they would like to first focus on improving the local situation through improving energy resilience, focusing on local energy consumption, local energy trading, and then in the future, energy flexibility services or whatsoever could be provided through the main connection to the mainland grid. But that would be something relevant for the future. So talking about present and future, it becomes obvious that engagement and the development of an attractive community microgrid would follow kind of a transition pathway. I show here in point 1 that first, focusing on attractiveness, it helps to identify a model, what are perceived risks, priorities, opportunities that help to shape the model, and then define the proposition. And from there, actually, businesses or local governments can find and initiate a model that is attractive and helps to initiate engagement of communities and investors, of those kind of that are already active. So here in this case, it would be kind of a bottom-up, community-led approach with socioeconomic values. Then, but only with facilitation of the model, it will help to make it increase. So decreasing barriers for participation, improving certainty. And then with time, there will be adoption and change, gradual inclusion, future-proofing the model. It will be attractive for people to tailor models to their needs and abilities, which helps to increase adoption further, and it will even acceptance will push engagement as the community actually sees benefits and sees, okay, yes, this time it's different. And for investors, they benefit, and it will increase attractiveness once it scales up. They learn from corporations and more certainties, and then with time and future, we hopefully increase and achieve the smart local energy system and the lighthouse island. So what are the implications of all this and my research? I think the perspective on attractiveness is really useful, and it helps to start thinking not on risks, but how to move forward. And so it's important to increase attractiveness and support engagement, but support it with time, and kind of presented that it's that that means to first look at local challenges, tackle them, and don't see them as challenges, but shift the perspective and frame them as local opportunities, and help to shape local solutions and policies. At the same time, it's important to create a kind of an aligned attractiveness through shared dialogue and a common understanding of the multiple of perspectives, not just one, but everyone needs to be included. That will drive innovation and a joint purpose, and it will help to overcome regional inequalities and ensure attractiveness. And finally, then we have to provide simple, scalable, and tailored solutions to decrease barriers of participation and encourage trust and transparency. And that will then hopefully get the engagement of everyone in an inclusive way. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. I'd say we have some common findings from both our researches, and I would like to open the floor now for any comments or questions from the audience. So feel free to unmute or raise a hand, and then hopefully we can get to everyone in time. Anyone want to join in? Robert, yes, feel free to unmute.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much to both speakers there for that. And yeah, as I was listening there, I couldn't help but think back to we had an Orkney Energy Conference that was more like a workshop earlier on this year, and one of the closing comments when we were looking at the scale of work that needed to be done for the type of work that Helen's talking about, creating an energy system locally that benefits everybody was, why would Orkney folk engage with this, with what needs to be done when they're struggling to pay their monthly electricity bills, to the extent that they are at the moment. And that's exactly what Helen's saying there, is that, folk aren't going to come along with the types of projects that we need to do here while they're paying through the nose for electricity that's generated in copious amounts, especially on a windy day like this on the islands, So I'm glad that people looking in on Orkney and hearing, the voices, see it the same way as we do.
If Helen or Christian want to comment on that, or of course, anybody else from the audience, feel free to as well.
Yeah, I guess a quick point on there. I completely agree with Robert, and that's something we heard a lot about, that kind of unfairness of why should people pay more for the energy that is produced locally. And sometimes it ends up curtailed because there is not enough kind of capacity on the lines to send down to the mainland. I think, yeah, it's a big challenge, and this change needs to happen. It's not only local; it has to be kind of across the whole UK, and the kind of energy markets are the way it is regulated. We hope at some point the cost of energy will be more reflective to the actual production cost, and kind of more localized markets, but it's still a long way. But I think exactly what you said, Robert, and also linked to what Helen proposes. Hopefully we'll see that coming on at some point, because it's important in order to get people engaged in this type of projects. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so a comment from my side. Thank you very much, Robert and Christian. I think it's really important that the policies change to allow this local energy consumption for the people to actually feel it on their energy bills, that they have this abundance of renewable energy and that they're at the forefront of the energy transition, and it's not an unjust energy transition. I think that's really the mind-blowing thing about the Orkney case. And what I wanted to highlight with my last slide of the pathway is that right now what we can do is give ideas to the to the governments to change their regulations and initiate change, but it should not stop any kind of initiatives. So we have to start already and take on board the active members of the community, but it should not. It is, I think, just simply understandable that not everyone wants to engage at that point, because some people are just, they lost their trust in the government and in the solutions. So it's we cannot complain about the lack of engagement under these circumstances, but with change and time, it is very possible to get all of them on board. We have to start developing inclusive solutions, focusing as well on the energy vulnerability members from the beginning.
Thank you both. I think we have a comment in the chat. I'll just read it so it is part of the recording. So Suzanne Davidson, unless you want to unmute, which you can feel free to. But if not, I'll just read your comment. So as far as she's aware, in Sweden, regions that produce renewable energy, they pay less for energy than the regions that receive it. So this seems like a fair model, whilst in Orkney, it is exactly the other way around. And it's true, it's something that part of the reason why we also wanted to research Orkney, where we thought this was quite the contradiction. I don't know if Helen or Christian, if you want to come up with any comment on this.
Just briefly on that, I'm not aware of that Sweden scheme, but sounds like a good option, to be fair. We heard the same type of comments. We have done some other workshops in the North Highlands, in the Thurso, Castletown area. And I think the challenge here is that there is kind of a single market with a single price for everything. And then the kind of the difference between the regions is based on the network costs. And of course, more lines, because of the land mass is bigger, it means that it costs more to maintain, and that's why it's kind of ends up to be unfairly higher for the people in the Highlands and the islands. On the point of the Sweden, I think we have seen examples of that, and there is lots of people working in the area about kind of nodal prices and kind of more local prices for energy, because it's not only about the production side of things, but also kind of about the constraint in the network. So, for instance, the case of the Highlands and Orkney, if you have lots of energy and there is not enough capacity, it could end up that you get paid to use energy. And examples of that you can see in the US. They have nodal pricing in certain areas, and there is some local industry, for instance, benefit a lot for that, because they say, oh, actually now they have lots of production for whatever and not enough demand, so they need to balance it. So you need more people demanding energy, and they can get paid for producing, I don't know, whatever industry there is in those regions. So there is a good case about nodal pricing. It is complicated and it's complex, and I think people have looked into that, but it could be a good option here. And I have other colleagues working on the power system side of things that think it's a good idea. Not an expert on power systems, unfortunately, but I just pass it on.
Yes, thank you, Christian. We thought it was actually quite sort of discrepancy, yes, in the Orkney Islands. And I wonder, also, Helen mentioned in her presentation regarding the regulations, and you were commenting on it. So if anyone in the audience actually has some more insight in what regulations you would suggest changing, or that you would see as potentially not on par with what's needed on the ground, since some of it might not exactly be coming from Orkney, but maybe from Scottish or UK government, that would be really interesting to know, since...
Sorry, I can't put up my hand, unfortunately, but I think part of the difficulty of the whole thing, it is, as you said earlier, a very complex question, but the costs are not on the production, they're on the transmission. So getting a wider understanding, the only actual solution is political, you get into. And if you have a private industry that you have to pay for production and pay for transmission, then the further away you are, more expensive it's going to be. It's unfair, but that's how it will remain until such time as there's a political solution going there. I think maybe for the people of Orkney, it'd be really interesting to get a really clear understanding of what their key priorities are, because I think being able to benefit more would be on their connectivity, broadband, etc. So, if they were able to come up with a key list in an ideal world, what would the Orcadians like? Set money to one side. If you're in a position where you need to get investment, attract investment, you need to get a return. So that kind of limits the discussion. But it'd be really interesting in remote areas to get, well, what is a key priority? How would you change things? I'm based in the Highlands, and I understand the issues that the Orcadians have. I come originally from Caithness, so I have a understanding of some of the issues that they're experiencing. But to get a solution, I think you'd need to work your way through a list of priorities and say, well, what would the Orcadians ideally wish, and then work through the priority list, and maybe do some scenario planning, to come up with a solution. To really seriously engage, you need to get a degree of understanding, and that's in a complex situation. That's not easily achieved. But as we stand right now, as well as producing, you have to transmit it and you have to sell it. So there's costs associated with it. It'd be really interesting for, I think having a micro grid system would help, would definitely help. But then you'd still be left at the other end where you'd have to maybe export the surplus. But a microgrid system would definitely help out.
Thank you, Jimmy. I see Robert, you can come in as well.
Yeah, sorry. Just when we were talking about the digital connectivity there, figures that were released short ago showed that, if we require smart meters to benefit for, time of use pricing, and get some benefit from the huge amount of storage heaters we have, and maybe being able to charge these at times of low demand and high generation. The penetration of the smart meter rollout into places like Orkney and Shetland and the Western Isles is in single figures of percentage of households compared to the rest of the UK, and we don't see much movement on that. And as part of my job, I'm supporting tenants or the housing association to try and get broken and stuck or broken energy meters, electricity meters changed, because there are not enough metering engineers willing to come to Orkney with any regularity. So we sometimes have folk stuck for months or years in some instances, not knowing how much they're paying for their electricity, and then having to fight the energy supplier to refund them credit that they've built up on that. So we've got multiple challenges before we can utterly get the benefits from any grid infrastructure and regulation changes, when the system is broken as it is at the moment.
Thank you, Robert. I'll just read also Suzanne's comment in the chat. So she mentions that Shetland might provide some insight on what priorities there are, and they may have seen what grave mistakes were made in Orkney, and Shetland Islands Council is carefully looking into the best way to make use of the upcoming large wind energy projects like Viking. So for the benefit of a region that is colder, windier, and has old housing stock and no access to the gas grid, a blueprint for Orkney, the same could have been that. So yeah, thank you, Suzanne. Also something to consider. It's interesting that in another presentation we did, we also had someone from Shetland that kind of said, so what about a comparison on what we're doing here as well regarding a hydrogen, for example, or wind? So that's something to consider as well. Maybe I'll also ask then, considering comparisons, Helen, I know you also looked into the Canary Islands in terms of the microgrids and also attractiveness of engagement. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what's different or maybe what's similar, and if that example could in any way also inform the Orkney case.
Yeah, thank you. The cases are indeed very different, and very interesting comparison that I did there, because obviously the context, the temperature is very different. Canary Islands are much bigger as well, and so different priorities came up, using the words of Jimmy. In the Canary Islands, people are they don't have this need and struggle for survival, let's say. They can be more concerned about the environment, and the culture already is more individualistic, so they are focused on economic benefits for themselves and the bonus of the environmental benefit that would make them attracted. And overall, they don't see, because from the Spanish culture as well, they trust less than the UK culture, actually, and they are not so eager to bottom-up approaches, so they would rather start a small-scale self-consumption kind of strategies, and then pile up maybe to a full renewable island. So it shows indeed that it is necessary to look at places, and we cannot really make one size-fits-all approaches, but that we rather need like tailored and place-based approaches, to use this fancy word. And I think that's really interesting. And in fact, it shows that it's necessary to learn from all kind of different contexts. So just like Susanne said, from Shetland, it's the more we can learn from different scenarios and places, the more we can probably translate, but it can never be translated one-to-one. But also from the previous comments, yes, the energy market structure is complex, and every country is different, and that even increases the complexity. And I would urge that there needs to be, like, it is a difficult challenge for the governments, I think, to balance their policy making into creating flexible policies that allow place-based solutions, but at the same time they need to be give the certainty for people and investors to engage, and at the same time they need to be more equal, the market structures between the countries, so that actually translations can happen easier. And I think the community microgrid perspective helps to show this local focus and what people would need to do locally and want to benefit from their local energy production to actually want to engage. And that's the same both in Canaries and in Orkney, that without the benefits, whether to the individual or the community, people won't engage, and that the cheaper electricity bill is necessary, and we cannot just put the burden on the shoulders of the citizens.
Thank you, Helen. I think that is a good way also to close off this webinar. Does anyone else have any last comments since we've come up to the hour? If not, then oh, I see Suzanne has one, so I will read it. So communities are also investors. They invest in the land and other resources. They invest the land and other resources. Not only money is investment. So that is true. And I think, especially in Orkney, I personally at least could see how there was a lot of this connection to the islands, and how that can actually increase the amount of investment that you would have in a particular project or initiative. So yeah, I would say that's a big advantage in belonging to kind of isolated but tight-knit community. So I will close off this seminar. If you have any further questions, we can also try to address them if you send us an email on them and send you more information. I would like to thank Christian and Helen for taking their time to present their research findings, and also to all of you to attend today, and also perhaps even participated in some of the workshops. I thank you. And our next webinar will be on the 8th of November when Sébastien Bourdin will discuss on what are the impacts of cohesion policy on the trade-off between employment and productivity. So maybe the UK context is not under cohesion policy anymore, but there might be some lessons here that some of you might be interested in. So you can contact us to register for our mailing list and keep up to date on our future events as well. So we hope to see you again, and take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.